Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With coronavirus cases increasing by over 315,000 every single day, setting a new world record which probably other countries will find very hard to beat, and with deaths increasing by over 2,100 a day, there are two questions the country is asking itself and is desperate for answers. How much worse can things become? And what should the government do? Those are two issues on which my guest today is eminently qualified to answer. She's been studying India's coronavirus trajectory from the very start of the pandemic last year. She's professor of epidemiology, biostatistics, and global public health at Michigan University, Bhramar Mukherjee. Professor Mukherjee, I last interviewed you on the 7th of April, and at that time, India's cases were growing by just 103,000 a day. At the time, you had done mathematical projections which forecast that at the peak, the surge would be growing at something like 1.8 to 3 lakh cases a day, and deaths would be somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 a day. 15 days later, and I want to emphasize that, just 15 days later, both those targets have been completely breached. Today, we're growing at over 315,000 cases a day. Deaths are over 2,100 a day. So let me begin by asking you, are you surprised by the exponential increase in the way this surge is going?
Thanks for talking with me, Karan, again. I'm very sad, but I'm not very surprised. I wanted to really err on the other side of these projections. Before I talk about the projections, I really want to state emphatically that it feels really difficult to talk about mathematical models and projections when the observed data on the ground is so much more stark than what we are projecting. And I'm saying that we need actions more than projections and predictions as a statistical modeler and as a humanitarian data scientist. But coming back to projections, I think that our models can reliably project 3 to 4 weeks in advance. And that too actually changes every day as the reality on the ground changes. Shortly after I spoke with you, I tweeted and I wrote in an opinion piece that the predictions went up, and it said that by the beginning of May, we could have 500,000 cases every day and 3,000 deaths. And I'm sure we'll surpass that as well, because the reality is really surpassing the projections, and our model has always underestimated the projections. These are really scary numbers, but these numbers also assume that there is mild to no intervention or no severe lockdown. I'm hoping that these numbers will incentivize people with the regional lockdowns, vaccination, and heightened awareness about the use of masks and avoiding indoor gatherings. So that's what the projections are.
I'll come in a moment's time later to whether there should be lockdowns, what the government should do about gatherings outside or indoors. But first, let me focus on that projection because it is so important and, in a sense, so blunt. What you're saying is that if there are no measures taken, and that is a big if there are no measures taken by the government, then by the beginning of May, that is to say, in roughly 8-9 days' time, India will have 500,000 cases a day and 3,000 deaths a day. Have I understood that correctly?
Absolutely.
Tell me, when will the peak come? Because you're talking about a situation in 8-9 days' time on the 1st of May. When will the peak come?
So we studied several models to project the peak. And I can show you that this is the IHME model, which you can see here. And they project the daily deaths. They don't project the number of reported cases because that's a function of lots of protocols in terms of access to testing. They do project the total number of infections. Our model, as well as their model, predict a peak towards the middle of May in terms of number of infections, and towards the second half of May for the number of deaths.
And tell me, in the middle of May, when the peak in terms of infections happens, what will be the daily number of infections at that point?
I'm hesitant to talk about this because I don't want to stir panic. but I also feel a moral obligation as a data scientist to accurately report the numbers that we are seeing. And you can see all of these numbers, they're publicly available along with our methodology at our website, covind19.org. So everything is transparent for the sake of reproducibility and scientific rigor. So what we are seeing is at the peak, we are going to have about 8 to 10 lakh cases, reported cases, many more infections, and 4,500 deaths. And this IHME model that I just showed you predicts 5,500 deaths every day for India at the peak.
This is frightening. It is so frightening that I'm just going to repeat in a nutshell the figures you've given, first for the beginning of May, let's say 1st, 2nd of May, and then the figures you've given for the peak, which in terms of infections will be middle of May, in terms of deaths, it will be 2 weeks later, end of May. Now, what you said was that by the beginning of May, we will have 5 lakh cases a day and 3,000 deaths a day. In the middle of May, that is 2 weeks later, we will reach the peak in terms of infections, and it will be 8 to 10 lakh infections a day, i.e. officially detected infections. And 2 weeks after that, at the end of May, when we come to the peak in terms of deaths, it will be 4,500 deaths a day. However, IHME in Seattle, which is a different organization, have projected 5,500 deaths by the end of May.
Yes.
Let me just check one thing. Have I correctly repeated what you said? I haven't made any errors there, have I?
Absolutely clear and absolutely correct.
So the truth is, we face a very frightening situation. The word frightening itself is probably too mild. There's no real word to describe how terrible it could be.
It is indeed scary. I have been tracking these numbers, and I have been tweeting and talking to people frantically because I still see that some people are not cognizant until it affects you and your immediate family. It's very hard to fathom, but it is really a very harsh reality.
I don't want to get obsessed with figures, but there's one more figure I'd like to ask you about. And I'm talking about the situation today, not beginning of May, not end of May. Today, we are growing officially in terms of detected cases at 315,000 every single day. But those are detected cases. How many more are there likely to be that are undetected? And before you answer, let me tell you what is the speculation in India. Professor Gautam Menon says that in fact, undetected cases are likely to be 20 or 25 times more. The Sero survey released by the government in February suggests undetected cases could be 27.5 times more. And IHME in Seattle, the organization you quoted a moment ago, says in fact, undetected cases could be 29 times more. What do you, a person that I think many in India trust and believe, what do you believe is the size of undetected cases? How many times more than the detected cases would it be today?
So I want to say that there is a lot of variation across India in terms of this detection rate, but overall nationally, we have always estimated the underreporting factor to be somewhere between 10 and 20, and it depends on where you are on the virus curve. So right now with surge and the system crumbling, I feel that the underreporting factor could be high. So for example, for regional variation, in Delhi, we have estimated, and we have a paper just coming out, an underreporting factor of 25 to 30. The IHME right now is projecting 4.5 million infections right now. And if you take the ratio of how many we have observed and what they're projecting, you'll get an underreporting factor of 15, which is very consistent with what our model estimates.
Overall, therefore, you believe the underreporting in India would be between 10 and 20. At the moment, you believe it's probably on the higher side of that range. Yes. But it also means that you are below the lowest of the three people I quoted, the lowest being Professor Menon, who said he believes the underreporting is 20 to 25. You're saying it's 10 to 20. probably closer to 20, but that's one reassuring thing. In terms of underreporting, you're at the lower side. But if I heard you correctly, you also said you believe, and you've got a paper coming out on this in a few days' time, that the underreporting in Delhi is probably between 20 and 25 times. That's correct about Delhi specifically, isn't it?
Yes, and there is a lot of heterogeneity because we do not have enough data. India as a nation, is a combination of rural and urban metros. So if you look at urban metros where most of the sero surveys were done, you get a much higher factor that may be driving some of the numbers previously quoted.
Let me come to another critical question. Do we today, or rather do you today, have a clearer idea whether this incredible surge in India is being fueled and driven by mutant strains? And I suppose I'm talking particularly about two mutant strains, the double mutant that has been found in Maharashtra and seems to be spreading there fairly furiously, and the UK variant that's been found in Punjab and has spread pretty furiously there. Do you believe the surge in India is driven by mutant strains, or do you think there are other explanations?
So I have written extensively about this, and since we spoke, there has not been, unfortunately, too much updates in terms of the data of the sequencing landscape. The only other piece of information we have is that the percentage of infections in Maharashtra, which used to be like 20% contribution from the double mutant, had increased to 64%. And I surmise so when we last spoke. So how quickly this mutant is replacing the original strain indicates that this is a transmissible, highly transmissible virus. And again, incorporating all the other factors, waning immunity, reinfection, cross-infection, unless we assume that there is something more highly transmissible, it's very hard to explain this really vertical exponential surge. Also, what I noticed from just anecdotal evidence is that families are getting infected, like cluster infections are much higher this time than the previous wave. I have read a lot of literature from virologists and immunologists, and they all studied these mutations, and they predict and they conjecture that the double mutant has the hallmark of being a dangerous virus. And so, but at this point, without further data, without a spatiotemporal map of the mutation distribution, I think all of this evidence is circumstantial.
Absolutely. I take that point, but what you're saying is in the absence of hard data, circumstantially speaking, or maybe I should say logically speaking, it does look as if this incredible surge, where the numbers are literally going up vertically, has to be driven principally by mutant strains, although there are bound to be other contributory factors as well. Have I understood that correctly?
Absolutely. I just want to add that there may be regional variation in terms of the different dominant strains that we are seeing in different parts of India. And so we really need to understand that landscape and how quickly they're becoming dominant.
Now, while I'm talking to you, in the last 2 days, the papers have begun to report another mutant strain. They're calling it a triple mutant this time. It's being dubbed by the Times of India as the Bengal variant, and its number is B1618. What do you know about this, and how worried are you about it?
I do think that it's not unexpected that you're going to see more mutations. So I don't want to be unnecessarily worried. I really want to study the properties of the virus in terms of transmissibility, lethality, in terms of how the clinical manifestations change, because it's not just the transmissibility. Do you think that you have to tweak your vaccines or your treatments or even the tests that are detecting, because the RT-PCR tests may not be optimized? So we need more data, and I'm not going to throw a dart in the darkness.
I take that. That's a very fair answer. It is too early to comment authoritatively on what they're calling the Bengal variant, the triple mutant, the number being B1618. Let's now move to steps you think the government should take. First of all, given the incredible vertical surge in the numbers, given the fact that hospitals are full, given the fact that, in fact, critical medicines and oxygen are in short supply, should the government declare a nationwide lockdown?
So I feel, Karan, the ship has unfortunately sailed a bit far. But we still have to try to turn this around because we cannot just give up. I think we made two colossal mistakes, not ramping up vaccination in February and March when the virus curve was at its valley and lower, and not intensifying our messaging with respect to intervention measures and taking it seriously when we actually saw the data. For a long time, we actually, all of us tried to predict and explain the mysterious decline. But in February, we started seeing the uptick. And not taking that seriously was a huge mistake. We continued with our lives. We lived in data denial. We continued with our religious festivals. We continued with our cricket matches. We continued with our shopping. We continued with our election rallies. And I feel like right now we are seeing regional lockdowns, and we have to really intensify lockdown measures as new hotspots come up. For example, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar are going to see large number of cases. West Bengal is coming up as a emerging hotspot. So we really have to think about regional lockdowns because national lockdown may not be feasible here. But if we do not really intensify, we may head towards national lockdown and there may not be any other choice left.
That's a very clear answer. At this moment, your advice is regional lockdowns stringently observed and quickly done,
Quickly done.
But if that doesn't happen, we'll be forced into a national lockdown. But you also said, and I think it's very important people should have that repeated, that the ship may have sailed a bit too far. That is worrying. In other words, we are too far out at sea to be able to pull back into safe harbor.
Yes. And that's the treacherous thing about this virus, right? You cannot wait to see all the reality on the ground to act. You have to really do proactive thinking instead of reactive measures.
And that sadly didn't happen. I don't want to go into it, but it's no great secret that this government didn't believe there would be a second spike, even though every single major country has had second and third spikes. And in each case, the second and third spike was worse. Here in India, on the 21st of February, the BJP was officially congratulating the Prime Minister, and I'm quoting its resolution, for defeating COVID. We believed in February, officially, the ruling party, we had defeated COVID. And on the 8th of March, the health minister officially said we were in the end game. That attitude meant we were unprepared. And this is why you say we are now too far out at sea to seek safe harbors. Let me come to a second area. What advice would you give the government in terms of huge public gatherings? Weddings, for instance, are still permitted. In some states with 50 guests, in other states with 100 guests. The Shahi Shnans are still officially going to happen on the 27th of April with a couple of 3,000-4,000 people present. And the Uttarakhand government is seriously considering permitting the Char Dham pilgrimage to happen. And that could involve tens of thousands of people. And it happens, by the way, in the middle of May, when, as you said, we could be at the very peak of infections. Should the government immediately stop these gatherings?
So, I have always believed that vacuous words are not meaningful. You have to really track the silent footsteps of this insidious virus and have to really speak with actions. So I think that these are against the fundamental principles of public health, because you should really have stringent measures so that you can save lives, and some of the deaths that are happening are preventable. I'm going to be radical here and say that citizens should also boycott these events out of their conscience. This is a criminal negligence to yourself and to your fellow citizens. It is the same type of nonchalance, negligence, data denial, complacency, and the lack of clear and cogent public health strategy that has led us here. This is a humanitarian crisis. It's not a political battle. It's not a religion battle. It's not a blame game. It has become a policy pandemonium and confusion because of this.
But you're saying, again, there is a huge onus of responsibility on individual citizens to behave better, not to attend large gatherings, not to endanger themselves, their families, their friends, their community. But you also said The time has come for the government to take action, no longer speak. In other words, the government, and I'm deliberately using colloquial language, must now crack the whip. It has to ensure these gatherings do not happen.
Absolutely.
What about in terms of genome sequencing? We've already discussed how it's more than likely that this horrible surge is as a result of mutant variants of not just one, but 2 or 3 types. Do you think the government needs to step up genome sequencing almost by an order of magnitude? Officially, if I think I've got the figures right, we've only done 13 or 14,000 sequences since the 1st of January, and it's under 1% of the increase since then. Leave aside the total increase. So does the government need to step up genome sequencing by an order of magnitude?
Absolutely. So the data from the sequencing projects have been very limited. And we talked about this last time. I think it's not just a question of the percentage of genomes that you sequence, it's also how strategic you are. So for example, if you have reported cases of reinfection or breakthrough infection from vaccines or infection positive international travelers, those should be at a high priority for sequencing, because your probability for detecting a variant, and we are really interested in this variant and vaccine landscape, so we need more data there. And India needs to deposit more data to the International Genetics Consortium for everybody to look at the data, because as we know that the UK variant is coming to India, the Indian variant is going to UK, and we really need international partnership and India as a strong contributor with genetic data so that everybody in the world can benefit from this data.
You're saying 2 very important things. Not only do we need more genetic sequencing by an order of magnitude, but we need it to be done strategically. And that's very important. But coming right to the end of this interview, Professor Mukherjee, let me ask you just 2 questions. How worried are you by the situation in India? And I implore you, give me a truthful answer, even if it's hurtful, even if it's worrying. How worried are you by the situation in India?
I'm really worried. I'm worried for my family. I'm worried for my parents. I am worried for all my loved ones. It is really hard to see the countless lives that are being sacrificed when in a few months we may have copious amounts of vaccines. So it is just seems like a public health nightmare. I'm also worried about not just this wave, about future waves, because this is not the last wave and this is not the last pandemic. And are we prepared as a country for a COVID adaptive future and invest in public health infrastructure? I think we need to have a plan and be able to execute our plan. So we are going to be dealing with random mutants. We are going to have to integrate sequencing into epidemiologic surveillance. We have to have a plan to outsmart these variants in this virus with vaccines. And we just need some time so that we can save lives. And I feel very unfortunate with the situation that is unfolding in India. And the fact that the distribution of loss and loss of lives is never equal.
My last question, Professor Mukherjee. How worried are you about the way the situation is being handled in India?
I don't believe in assassinating somebody or dissecting the problem. And I have to sort of say some of the positive things that have happened. For example, opening up the vaccine market to international partners, to have really opening up to 18 plus. But as you are opening up, if you're increasing demand, you really have to think about supply. So some of these policies have to be bolstered with rationale. And now I'm a little worried that with this opening up with 18 plus, then all the state governments may have to navigate for vaccines where they're already struggling to ensure oxygen supply. So I feel that there has been some important steps, and I do believe that everybody is sincerely trying. But the fact is that there has been huge mistakes here which have been made, and we cannot rewind time. And we cannot really retract Kumbh Mela, cricket matches, massive election rallies. The list goes on. I feel like we saw the tidal wave coming, but we only have picket fences to stop it. And India as a country should not be in this position. So I also feel that there is public has a role to play in public health. There is a sense of fatalistic surrender to destiny or sheer negligence and nonchalance. And it's really feels helpless. And I also feel, I get the sense that every citizen is on their own. There is no safety net. Everybody is trying for his survival. There is no social support. There is no accountability. Or there is, I really want to see that. I would love to see a scientific briefing by the government, really supported with data and science, and also sending a humanitarian message. My last point, I want to say that this is a global crisis. Other international countries, other international leaders should help India, should help Brazil with vaccines, with oxygen, with COVID care supply.
Okay.
Our health is really interconnected.
You said something very interesting, and I want to pick up on it. We saw the tidal wave coming, provided we wish to open our eyes and recognize it. Either we were myopic and closed our eyes, or worse still, we deluded ourselves into believing that when the tidal wave comes, we can surf it. Instead, it's now crashing around us and we're in danger of drowning. And you also said something else. It looks to you from that distance in Michigan as if it's every individual citizen left to himself and there is no safety net. That is deeply worrying. And you put your finger right at the beginning on something that I mentioned. You were very worried about the fact that vaccination from the 1st of May is being opened up to everyone over the age of 18. The Hindu has calculated that between the age of 18 and 44, we have 595 million people. If all of them suddenly decide, because they're scared, because they see the situation around them, that they want to be vaccinated and become safe, we simply do not have the vaccines. We are producing, as of today, 2.4 million a day. And even now, as I speak, there are vaccine centers all over the country in different places on different days that have to close down because they don't have vaccine. How are we going to give it to an additional 595 million in 8 or 9 days' time? I thank you for raising those concerns. I thank you for your openness. I also thank you for what will be deeply frightening, unnerving, and horribly worrying, the truth about how high it can go. We could have, as you said, 5 lakh cases and 3,000 deaths in just 8 or 9 days' time on the 1st of May. And that could rise to 8 or 10 lakh cases and 4,500 deaths by the end of May. That's frightening. Professor Mukherjee, thank you very much for your honesty. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karan. I wish all your viewers and India and yourself safety. And I hope that we can vaccinate the country and we can take all of the appropriate measures to steer the ship back. We cannot just surrender to destiny. We cannot stop running our models and we cannot stop doing our work, and our responsibility to the society is of paramount importance today.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
You too.